Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you're joining us from. And welcome to this session, which is Dramatizing the Invisible Infrastructure of Space and Satellite. If this is not the flight you intended to be on, now's the time to exit the cabin. But otherwise, we'll look forward to having you join us on the journey. My name is Robert Bell. I'm Executive Director of Space and Satellite Professionals International, which I'll tell you a bit more about. And joining me today are Sharon Nierenberg, who's Senior Director of Corporate Communications at Hughes Network Systems, you'll also learn about, and Haley Ross, who's Senior Marketing and Communications Manager at a company called Speedcast. And I'm going to be talking for a little while, and then we're going to turn back to them and get their expert input. So thank you, Sharon and Haley, very much for joining us. Okay, so dramatizing the invisible industry, right? When we talk about satellite, perhaps you never thought of it as being invisible, but whether you're talking about the technology up in the sky, which of course is beyond our line of sight, except for Elon Musk's Starlink satellites, which are getting some hassle from the astronomical community for their appearance in the sky, or even the infrastructure on the ground, satellite antennas and the teleports and facilities all around the world. They are critical to modern life. And we're talking about everything from the maps on your phone, which come from GPS, TV programs, which spend some of their life on satellite, weather forecasting, military missions, oil production, shipping, electric utilities, internet, airlines. I could go on, but basically the world kind of stops unless this technology exists. And yet its critical contributions go largely unrecognized and by all the people that matter, business, by investors, by government agencies, and the general public. There was no better illustration of this in my life than when under the Obama administration in the US, there was a very large, well, it wasn't large enough, but what seemed a very, very large stimulus program to install broadband, to help fund broadband deployment. And in the initial bill as it was signed and became law, not one penny was allocated to satellite, in spite of the fact that 25 million Americans can't reach a network, could not reach a network at that point in any other way except by dial-up. Some hardworking companies, including Hughes, went to work, sent their lobbyists in and got that changed over time, but it was very indicative of the kind of problems you're talking about and a key strategic challenge to an industry that is going through a lot of growth right now. And if I had to sum it up, I'd sum it up this way. Guys like Elon and Jeff and Richard, those billionaires who are doing so much to change how we relate to space and satellite, everybody's on a first name basis with them, but they have no idea how much of our daily lives depend on the past 50 years of innovation in space and satellite. So at SSPI, we set out to change that. And if you're not familiar with us, we're the biggest member network in satellite and space. We've got nearly 3,000 individual members and 50 corporate members in more than 40 nations around the world. And it's everybody in the industry. It's the people who build the spacecraft, who launch and land those rockets, who fly the satellites, who create and operate ground networks, and who create technology that fills all those ground networks and all those spacecraft. It's a very small, very powerful, and very intensive industry doing important things every day. And for SSPI, our mission is the people of those industries, whether they're new hires or they're executives with 30 or 40 years of experience. And they may be in startups, they may be in mature companies with billions of revenue. Why do they matter? Well, it's easy for us to say that people are our most important product, and companies do that. But we actually passionately believe that they are the engine of the innovation, the disruption, and the experimentation that is sweeping this industry and going to make it much, much bigger over the next 10 to 15 years. So we do two things at SSPI to help that along. First of all, we help the industry to attract, develop, and retain talented people. And this is at a time when, satellite used to be, the space in general used to be the high-tech industry. For those of you who are old enough to remember that, it's not perceived that way anymore, even though what it does is a lot harder than what Google or Facebook or Alphabet or any Amazon do every day. And so we have to fight for our share of the smart people in the world. And so we do that at SSPI by connecting them across the boundaries of the industry, by challenging their ambitions, and by offering them opportunities to grow in their careers, principally through a lot of peer learning. We also, on the other side, promote the enormous value of space. We are shameless promoters of the fact that we do amazing things for the world every single day. And the reason that we do that is because it inspires the people of the industry and also attracts new talent into that business, because young people in particular these days are looking for careers that make a difference. And boy, everybody who works in this industry makes a difference every day. It also helps justify the interest of investors. There's still a fairly small minority of the investment community that focuses on space and satellite. We want to grow that, and it attracts new ones into it. It gives potential new customers a reason to care. And I stress that because for most of its 50 years, the industry kind of sold into the same niches: broadcasting, maritime, oil and gas, the telephone industry. In the next 10 to 15 years, it's going to be selling to a vastly greater range of customers who can't even spell satellite. So we want to give them a reason to notice. And in so doing, inspire the growth of what's currently forecast to be over $1 trillion in a space economy of the future. So we're doing our bit to put the shoulder to the wheel on that. So that's who we are. That's why we care about this topic. And that's why we're here today to talk to you about it. We launched this campaign, this public awareness educational campaign, in 2016. And it consists of a set of 35 to date videos, with quite a few more in production, that dramatize the human impact of space and satellite on our world. Most of these are designed for general audience. We have a series that we've been producing that we're going to be bringing out to the educational community, specifically for middle school, high school kids, where they're making their decisions or beginning to make the decisions that will lead to a career. So we're looking forward very much to releasing that. But to give you a flavor for what I'm talking about, I want to play for you the very, very first video that we ever released.
So, what has a satellite done for you lately? Yeah? What has he? Me? Yeah, you. Satellites are so far up in the sky that you can't see them, but you use them every day, everywhere you go. That map on your phone or in your car that keeps you from getting lost? It's talking to satellites. Your favorite TV show? Satellites help get it to your TV, your computer, even your phone. Farmers use satellites, so do bankers, scientists, relief workers, and the people who forecast the weather. Billions of people around the world are online and making phone calls thanks to satellite. In fact, if all the satellites up in the sky suddenly disappeared, it would make for one really interesting day on Earth. TV broadcasts would disappear. Your smartphone would lose its mind. The internet would go dark for billions of users. But that's just the start. Emergency responders and military forces would lose touch. Airlines would be grounded. The world's computer networks would begin to fail. Stock markets and traffic lights, electricity grids, water systems would follow. The world as you know it would grind to a halt. Well, it's a good thing that's not going to happen. It's a good thing that satellites are so reliable because so much depends on them. So, what has a satellite done for you lately? Just made your world a whole lot better. Thanks. Danke.
Merci. Gracias.
Your world better with satellite. Brought to you by the Society of Satellite Professionals International with the support of Mansat and Microspace.
Okay, so that's the flavor for the very first one we did. We decided to do that widescreen animation because it was popular at the time, probably still is. And I just want to talk a little bit about the creative approach behind these before we start hearing from some of the folks who helped us make it happen like this. In general, we decided we wanted to target a pretty broad audience with one common characteristic. They have an interest in technology. And that ranges from high school, college, and university students who are beginning to think about their next step in life up to a general business audience, and most specifically, including industries that depend on satellite and where the top executives don't even know it. Nothing makes me happier than when I meet an executive and we talk about it, and I tell them what goes on with satellite in their business, and they look at me and say, "Really?" I say, "Yeah, really." And also, and this is important, for a lot of educational campaigns, we also wanted to make sure that we were educating our own industry, because over the years of operating in those very narrow niches that I described, the industry got used to talking in kind of techno speech, techno babble, because they assumed that the people they were talking to already had a big understanding. So it was about throughput, how much you could ram through that connection, and look angles, and beams, and other things that aren't really communicating to people who are coming to this industry new. And so we set out to begin to say what we need to be talking about is the value we provide. And one of my great memories, and about a year ago, or actually a bit more than a year ago now, because of COVID, hearing of the CEO of a major satellite company stand up and give a speech about his company. And he didn't talk about how much money they made. He didn't talk about how big their satellite fleet is, although it's the largest in the world, or outside of the world. He didn't talk about any of the things he would normally have talked about. He talked about lives saved. He talked about economies given new energy. He talked about the value that was being delivered. And I thought, well, I don't know how much we had to do with that, but I'm certainly excited that that's now what the industry wants to talk about. We also decided to keep technology jargon to a minimum, enough of it so that if you do know something, you can respect what you're hearing, but not enough so that we leave anybody behind. And to focus exclusively on the value you're delivering. And the values go on and on: education, employment, business growth, lives saved, food grown, disasters averted, and disasters responded to effectively. And again, the list goes on and on. And something that we sort of was an assumption that we were making behind the scenes, but it took some conversations with people in the industry to bring it out. And that was, as soon as you say to people you're doing this, they want to start telling you about what they have done to donate services to somebody. We gave some technology to this company, or we gave them 2 months of free satellite service, which is very expensive. And the point that we made over and over again is, you don't have to give it away to be doing good in the world. You are delivering enormous value to the planet, and you need to make money doing it so you can keep on doing it. And people, I think, were very relieved to hear that message. And finally, it was all about the real world. We work with a number of student organizations. These are university students, and they're basically, space crazed young people who are really excited about what they're doing today, what they're learning, and about what they're going to be doing tomorrow. And when I chat with them and ask them, so what do you expect to do with this graduate degree or this undergraduate degree? The general answer is, I'm going to go to work for NASA or JPL in the United States, or ESA in Europe, or one of the other agencies doing things. And I just sort of smile and look at them and say, I'm sorry, but that's probably not true. I mean, you'll get an internship, I'm sure, because they're good at that. But the taxpayers don't want to pay enough to hire all you people. But I come from this $400 billion a year industry that probably is really interested in your service and in your services. And they say, well, what industry is that? And I say, commercial space and satellite. And sometimes that isn't enough. And then I finally say, Elon Musk, and then we're all on the same page. So, and these are young people who know a lot about space and satellite. But what they don't know is how vital and innovative and fast growing the commercial side of the business is. And it's not really their fault. One of the issues in this business that has always disturbed me is that there's a real terrible divide between the academic community and the commercial world, with the exception of some companies that have built partnerships with local universities and some instructors there who are, very forward-looking. There's just not much flow back and forth there. And that's changing again as the industry becomes better known. But it's one of the things that I'd like to see change a lot faster personally. So that's what our philosophy was, or our creative approach. And what I want to do in the rest of the session is to share with you 3 specific examples, and we'll talk about how those came about. And then we'll also be, happy to bring your questions into this. Unfortunately, I can't see my chat screen right now because I'm playing slides. But go ahead and if you have questions and comments along the way, put them in there. I'll catch up when we get to our Q&A session. So the examples are the Siberian connection, which was made possible by the financial support of Hughes Network Systems. And you'll see that in just a moment. A better future for the last of the Incans, made possible by Speedcast. And footing the climate bill for the planet, for the world, produced by a company called, or rather I should say, made possible by a company called Planet. So here is, without further ado, the Siberian connection.
It is a vast land, making up 3/4 of all of Russia. It is an empty land where fewer than 1 in 4 Russians live. Notorious for long, harsh winters, but rich in gold and diamonds, oil and coal. It is Siberia, where the city of Yakutsk claims to be the coldest in the world, where winter temperatures hover around -40 degrees. More than half of Siberians live in cities like this, but leave those cities and you come face to face with the land. Millions of square miles of plains, mountains, lakes, and swamps, frozen hard in winter, coming to green life in the short summers. Here, people live in small towns and villages scattered across the land. Isolation can be harsher than the winter wind. It cuts people off from family and friends. It robs them of access to services, to work, and education. Distance destroys the connections that make a good life, except for connections by satellite. A company called Hughes Network Systems has equipped 1,300 towns and villages across Siberia with its community Wi-Fi hotspots. Hughes works with Russian communications companies to install satellite terminals and Wi-Fi access points that offer affordable neighborhood service to more than 300,000 people. For most of them, it is the first internet connection they've ever had. It brings them public services and online education, work opportunities, and connection to distant family and friends. It makes Siberia part of a vibrant online community circling the globe. And Siberians have a lot to offer the world. They are a strong people who speak their minds with a rich culture forged in hardship. They work hard, and they know how to play hard as well. Siberians don't let their challenging climate slow them down. Hughes, its Russian partners, and a little bit of satellite are making sure that distance doesn't either. Satellite, the world's invisible, indispensable technology. Brought to you by Space and Satellite Professionals International with the support of Hughes Network Systems. Additional support provided by ADL Technologies and Artel.
So to talk more about that, I'm joined here by Sharon Nirenberg, who's Senior Director for Corporate Communications at Hughes Network Systems. Sharon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Robert. That was a great introduction and a great overview of our industry and why we all do what we do.
Well, I sometimes worry somebody's going to start throwing rocks at me for my critiques, but I think we're all pretty comfortable with them at this point. Let me ask you. So we started talking about this. I can't remember when we produced this thing. We started talking about, okay, we'd like to do some kind of video about what we do. What was the appeal for you of creating one of these Better Satellite World videos with SSPI that told this kind of story?
I think it's everything that you were talking about in your introduction. One of the biggest challenges in this position, working on the communication side of the satellite industry, is telling the stories and making the technology and the applications relevant to an audience of either influencers or potential employees or potential customers and partners, because, as you say, it is the invisible infrastructure, and it's the whole challenge. It's a classic marketing challenge, really, to the extreme, because you want to hone in on showing the impact of the services and the technology, but it's impossible to do because the technology is invisible.
Yeah, exactly. This industry, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is in pretty steady battle all the time with the mobile phone industry for spectrum, for the radio frequency spectrum. They want more of it, and they find us a convenient place to turn to get it from a regulatory standpoint. And so here's the battle. I've got one of these in my pocket, mobile phone in my pocket. I don't have a satellite in my other pocket. So, what do I care about as a consumer or as a voter or as somebody who's going to influence regulation? Okay, so why was this the particular topic that was right to do? I think it was our first video together.
Yeah, well, I love the campaign, first of all. I love the whole theme of the campaign and the consistency of the storytelling and making the technology real and the applications real, because we're struggling to do that constantly. So the way that you've been able to do that consistently throughout this whole program has really stood out to me. And then when it came to our specific example, we wanted to come up with something that was compelling, could really grab people's attention, and would showcase a solution that might be a little bit more unique in the industry, something that we hadn't talked about yet through this campaign. And so I think it was you that mentioned, we had a written case study about this project in Russia. And I think that you were the one who suggested that this would be a good topic, and I wholeheartedly agreed, because it's compelling. It's, you know, a fascinating story.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so in terms of the production process, we had the conversation. That's how it all started. And then SSPI wrote a treatment, which is just a few paragraphs about what we think the story's about, put it in front of you. We subsequently wrote a script based on the approval of that. What happened inside the company? I mean, how many people had to look at that? How difficult did you find it?
Well, the good news is that it was pretty easy on the internal side, because the script hit the mark, the treatment hit the mark. It was consistent with how we talk about our business. There was a little bit of discussion about naming our partners in this or not naming them, and how deep we wanted to go in that piece of it. And we made the decision to make it focused more on the story and less on who the specific partners were. So we needed to run it through one of my colleagues who's in Russia, who's our lead in that market, and he has the relationship with the customers. And so we ran it past him, and he consulted with the customers' marketing teams to make sure that everybody was comfortable with how we were talking about the solution. And I collaborate internally with marketing teams from our different lines of business. So in this case, I ran the treatment and the script by our lead for the international marketing team. And with his buy-in and my buy-in and the customers, we were ready to go.
Well, it's funny, this can, and you handle it very well, because I wasn't aware of most of that, but this is an interesting takeaway for me, because yes, there's always hoops to jump through when you're going to work with a partner. But there's huge value in that, because, we're here making up stuff about Russia and so forth based on general knowledge. And you're able to go to the people who actually know about it and put this in front of them and say, is this realistic? And that feedback is very, 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 very useful, because one of the things I've learned about video in general and education in particular is that people can tell whether you're making it up. People can tell whether you're giving them glittering generalizations or whether you're telling something that actually feels right.
Exactly. And again, that's one of the challenges with this, because, we use a lot of stock video, a lot of stock footage to show our services, to show our applications. And it's, that is made up, but it reflects what's really happening in the market.
Well, and I'm glad you opened that up, because so then, we have a script, and then what do you do? Well, Hughes is able to provide, a certain amount of footage, which was very useful. And again, that's a benefit of working with a partner that has access to that stuff. And then the rest of it is stock footage. It's stuff you go searching for on YouTube and from some nonprofit or university, and you get the rights to do it. And so you put this together, it ends up being a relatively simple edit compared to going out and shooting stuff, original stuff. And the costs become something you can manage. Sort of looking at the finished video all over again, what do you think it is communicating about A, your company, and B, the industry in general?
Well, I think it does a really good job of conveying the impact of the service and the value that the service brings, and positions Hughes as an enabler of that service in a way that's, I don't feel like it's beating our chest and really in a bragging kind of a way, but instead just serving it up and crediting Hughes with helping to put it together, along with our partners. But ultimately, most of the video is about the people that the service impacts, much more so than it is, as you said earlier, we're not talking about the throughput. We're not talking about the actual Wi-Fi equipment or the satellite dishes or the network management that goes into this kind of a system. And so I think ultimately it really does what we intended to do, which was show the impact and what we're enabling in this particular instance. And it's easy from that, I think, to extrapolate that there are probably lots of other good stories like this, from the Hughes perspective, but also across the industry.
And have you been able to put this video to work for your company?
Definitely, we have, yes, showcasing it at our conferences and events for prospects and customers, and using it as a showpiece for this particular type of an application, which is rather a unique version of the community Wi-Fi hotspot solutions, which have started to gain a lot more traction worldwide. And so this is one way that we're able to show how this particular solution works and has real world impact.
All right. Well, thank you. That's we'll have some more time for questions and answers, but thank you. I'm going to move on to keep everybody on schedule here to our next video, which is on a quite a different topic.
High in the sky, amid Peru's tallest mountains, live a people from another time. They are called the Caros, and they are the last traditional community of the Incan nation. Life at high altitude is hard. The Caros raise animals and farm the rugged land as their ancestors did, and their lives have long been marked by food insecurity, high child mortality, and poor education. In 2010, a student named Hannah Ray Porst came to live with the Caros for a university project. When her research came to an end, she asked the villagers how she could thank them for their hospitality. What they needed most, they told her, was a school. That conversation stayed with Hannah Ray, and back in America, she began raising money. Within a year, she was able to launch construction of the school and also moved to Peru. To keep the improvements coming, she founded a charity called Wilka Yachai, which means sacred wisdom in Quechua, the language of the Caros. Over the next years, Wilka Yachai helped the community build more schools, centers for adult learning and health, fish ponds, and greenhouses. But while making life better for them, the charity also wanted to preserve the culture that gave meaning to their lives. That would take more than building projects. Wilka Yachai went in search of a way to bring the internet to the Caros. It found Kidnected World. That's an NGO that brings interactive education to Indigenous children in the Americas and Africa with the help of a company called Speedcast. Speedcast is a global communication and IT service provider. It serves thousands of energy platforms and mines, cargo and cruise ships, governments, and businesses around the world. Speedcast advised the charity on buying the right technology and sent staff to install it. The company also donated a year's worth of satellite internet service. And the internet helped build a better future. It brought medical advice for the sick and connection with distant family members. It connected teachers from far away who taught the math, physics, and engineering needed for building projects that keep improving the Caros' quality of life. Craftspeople began to sell traditional woven goods online to a global market. Kidnected World donated its online platform of tools, meetups, and content. And Caros kids found new ways to celebrate and share their culture with others around the world. When COVID-19 reached Peru, the government imposed a strict quarantine on indigenous groups. With reliable internet service, the Caros have been able to stay safely sheltered in their high mountains, but still connected to the world.
So at the start of the coronavirus
coronavirus pandemic, we had advised our compadres and Caros to stay in their mountain communities and to keep visitors out. They have done that. Our Speedcast internet connection is our only means of communication with them, and it's working really well. We communicate with the community members all the time, and they report that they are all healthy. Thank you, Speedcast, for providing this lifeline for the Caros. Y cuídate, por favor.
Space and satellite, the world's invisible, indispensable technologies. Brought to you by Space and Satellite Professionals International with the support of Speedcast.
Okay, so we've now seen the video. Now we're going to talk to the person, Haley Ross, Senior Marketing and Communications Manager for Speedcast. Haley, what do you think? I mean, what do you think grabbed the company's attention when we began talking to them about this Better Satellite World video series?
Yeah, it's SSPI has been a long-standing, very well esteemed organization in our industry, and knowing that and kind of following the Better Satellite World campaign since its inception in 2016, all those things in mind really sold us on, we need to tell this story, and it's a very important story. I will note too that personally, as I've followed the campaign and I've worked previously with you on other stories, it just seemed like a really natural fit to go this route and share the story on this platform. And
it's funny, Sharon reminded me that it was from, she basically got talking about the things they do, and I lit up when she mentioned the Siberian project. I remembered exactly the same thing with you. We were just talking about different ideas, and you started talking about this, and I said, "Oh, ooh," yeah. Because I just started seeing the Andes in my head, and right. So it turned into a really interesting thing. By the way, one of the things I want to make clear is that the video says that you donated some capacity to them, which was great, and you got them through a rough patch, but they're also a paying customer, right? So that is correct. It's an important part of it, right? Because we can't keep giving it away and stay in business. So the production process in this one was kind of was more intricate because there were more people involved. So you had some footage of the install. I mean, we went through the same thing of the treatment and the script, and again, what was the internal approval process similar, to what Sharon told us about?
Yeah, and it's interesting when I heard Sharon's perspective on how this went in her organization. I would say, despite the different people and stakeholders involved, it was still a pretty smooth process. And I think part of it is just the buy-in on the story itself, the alignment on, all the pieces of what we provided, and especially when it came to working with Hannah Ray Porst and her organization Wilka Yachai, which was a really great opportunity to connect with her. And I know that was something that we worked on together, Robert, and really made sure that we were contacting the right folks, both internally and externally, to make sure we have all facets of this amazing story intact. So it was a really collaborative process, and I think that's really important when it comes to making sure we really hit the nail on the head with stories like these.
Well, and it's funny, you mentioned we've been doing this since 2016, as I said, and we've learned along the way. So, one of the things that we've learned is when you're working with a partner or anybody who's a stakeholder, it doesn't matter whether they're a funding partner, boy, you really need to find stages all along the way where you involve them. So we learned, for instance, to write a treatment ahead of time and, give people a chance to think about that before you got down to the details of the script. And we learned to record, basically audition voiceover actors, and then give our partners a selection of 6 to 8 voices, saying you pick one. And by doing this, I think that's powerful in maintaining that smooth flow, because people feel included. They don't feel there's any surprises coming along.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of what makes projects like this so exciting. And, there's that element of creativity that we all have to contribute. So, we collaborate quite a bit, but also having that ownership internally that, we're really playing an important role, partnering with SSPI on this journey of producing this video, which makes it very exciting and very engaging, and it makes it a lot more meaningful too on the internal side, just being a big part of that.
It's more fun than most of what you do during the day. Let's put it that way. Looking at the finished video again, with fresh eyes, what do you think it communicates about Speedcast, and what does it communicate about the industry?
Yeah, and it's going back to what you said earlier about the education aspect in a very technical field. And I know personally, I have friends and family that will ask me to this day, what is it again that your company does? Explain it to me. And completely a valid question, completely understandable. I learn something new every day, having almost 10 years in this industry. So I think it's important to have that education factor, really to be able to tell the story of what we do and how we contribute to the world, how we impact lives and reach end users in the way that they need to be connected to, friends and family, and connected to their operations and all the different connections that need to be made that we make possible. So I think that stories like these really help with that education factor, but also in terms of the business side, it helps provide a case study, a real life example, and really as a reference point for prospects in the humanitarian world. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of opportunities that we can donate connectivity service, but then we do have, that business side that we need to maintain. And so being able to share this is kind of a reference for them to see what's possible and what we can partner with them to achieve.
So it's a nice introduction. And I guess you've already mentioned this is how you put this video to work for your company. I'm curious, we have also produced, as I mentioned, a series of videos designed for junior high school and high school students. So they're a little simpler, they're bigger concepts, fewer details, and obviously directed at the idea of what are you going to do with your life. And to my surprise, one of the major names in our business got very excited about it and said they wanted to use it in their own training program. And how do we arrange to do that? And I was like, really? So I guess these days our industry is bringing in people who really don't know much about satellite.
Yeah. And really that's, I think, where this kind of project comes in, and sharing these stories raises awareness of not only what we do, but how we, ultimately our core value is to make sure that we're contributing and making the world a better place. So I think that, that's the power of these videos, and these stories really accomplishes that mission.
Okay. Well, now we're going to step back from Siberia and from Peru and look at the whole world from a different lens.
The vast forests of the tropics are givers of life. 80% of the Earth's land animals and plants live there, and more than 250 million of the world's poorest people make their livings from the forest. Forests matter. The trees of the Amazon produce 1/5 of the oxygen we breathe. All the world's forests keep more than 200 billion tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. But every year, fire, bulldozers, and lumber crews clear millions of hectares of forests, an area bigger than New Zealand. In just the last 40 years, the world has lost a forest area equal in size to all of Europe. Stopping deforestation is hard. The poor people most affected by it have little power to change things. Much of it breaks national laws, but overstretched governments struggle to stop it. One nation, however, stands out. The government of Norway is the first to fund programs that help tropical nations rein in deforestation. A grant to Brazil in 2008 helped preserve enough forest to keep 3 billion tons of carbon out of the air. A 2010 agreement with Indonesia offered incentive payments for reducing emissions, and that nation's carbon output dropped by half in just a few years. In 2020, Norway took another step. It announced a first-of-its-kind public-private partnership with Planet, Airbus, and KSAT. Together, they would provide access to detailed satellite imagery covering 64 countries, all for free.
Planet operates a vast fleet of small satellites called doves. They take pictures of all the Earth's landmass every day. Those pictures are detailed enough to reveal individual trees. Airbus is adding an archive of images captured by its Spot satellites since 2002. These allow today's forests to be compared to those from years ago. The Norwegian company KSAT is pulling together all this data and providing technical support to users who can view and download the files from Global Forest Watch or Planet. With daily updates from space, the images offer the first chance to see deforestation while it is happening. Logging and land clearing operations deep in the forest can no longer hide. Governments and international organizations can identify illegal actors and pressure them to change. And all this value comes free of charge because the Norwegian government is paying for the service. For the founders of Planet, this effort is the realization of a dream. When CEO Will Marshall, Chief Strategy Officer Robbie Schindler, and Chris Boshausen left NASA to found the company, their goal was to provide actionable data on the whole planet at the speed of change. This lets governments, businesses, and researchers make smarter, more informed decisions to better protect our world's ecosystems. For Norway, the images show its forest funding at work. As the government's Minister of Climate and Environment told the BBC, we decided to foot the bill for the world. So, the next time you take a deep breath, thank Norway and the images and technology that come from companies like Planet, Airbus, and KSAT. Together, they are helping keep the life-giving forests of the world alive. Space and satellite, the world's invisible, indispensable technologies. Brought to you by Space and Satellite Professionals International.
So that's footing the climate bill for the world. Unfortunately, an executive of the company who was supposed to be able to join us at the last minute had to pull out because of one of those conflicts you can't avoid. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the production on that thing. It was interesting for a number of reasons, one of which was that the company Planet didn't want to have its logo on it, not because they were ashamed of it, but just because that's kind of how they think about what this is about. This is not about them, which is very unusual in the commercial world. And I'm not quite sure it's a good idea, but anyway, that's what they did. This again was, this came up in conversation. We were talking about different topics because this is Earth observation. These people, what this is called in satellite, Earth observation. And, so naturally you think about something related to the environment. And sort of almost in passing, the person who I was dealing with said, well, we just recently did this deal with the Norwegian government. I said, after I heard the story, of course, I said once again, well, that's it right there. Again, they were very helpful in providing a lot of footage, as you can see. We were able to get other footage from again, with permission from Norway, and a lot of imagery that way. And so all those things, came together to tell the story. And you see the same things that Haley and Sharon talked about, in that we're interested in the story. We're interested in explaining how companies deliver this kind of value. And ultimately, at the end of the day, though, we want this to be an emotional experience, because emotion is what makes a difference in people's lives. I don't think there's anything else terribly notable that's different from the production process of the other two. I just would say that Planet is also, using this a lot. They're using this in their recruitment. They're using this in their sales processes, and we're certainly pushing it out pretty hard. If you want to see any of these videos or any of the others, I should have put this up on the screen, but I didn't. All you have to do is go to this URL, www.bettersatelliteworld, all one word, bettersatelliteworld.com. And you'll have access to all of them, because video does not always come through the system as well as it might. So just a couple of takeaways before we turn to your comments and questions. One is perhaps something that you already believe, but stories are incredibly powerful. Detailed explanations, facts, so forth. Yeah, those help. But at the end of the day, if you want people to engage with what you're trying to do with them, if you want them to actually learn and to retain what they've learned, in my experience, stories are what get the job done. partnerships are productive, and some teaching organizations are extremely good at partnerships, and others tend to be more insular. And I'm here to tell you that, open is better. These business, educational, nonprofit relationships have the great advantage of connecting learning with the world of work, of commercial innovation, of the things that people will be experiencing throughout their lives in careers. So they're really powerful. They take a lot of work in some cases. I'm a little ahead of the game because we already have a membership organization and we already have good relationships. But if you're starting from scratch, it takes some work. I think it always pays off. And lastly, education happens, in the classroom. Education happens over the Zoom connection. Education happens absolutely everywhere. And what you're really trying to do is to get people to think differently about value, no matter what it is you're teaching. I think that's ultimately the thing that you're teaching about. So I'm going to stop there and stop sharing so that we can all see each other a bit better. There we are. And let me open the chat so I can see that. So I have one question from the audience, which is, it's all about education. Well, I certainly think so. Do any of you work on the campaigns for kids to start introducing the topic of the young generation? Yeah, I mentioned that we've got this series. We just recently, or rather we're getting ready to release the third in the series called Space Saved Lives. And it's these 3 videos. One of them it's called The Road to Space. And it's a very, very brief history, starting with Galileo, of the space and satellite industry. And of course, it finishes with that. You could be working in this sector. These people are going to change how we live forever. You might want to do the same. The second one is called, Is There a Satellite Inside? And it's a quiz. So it's a set of questions about the common products that young people use every day, from their phones to their sneakers, and asking the question, is there a satellite inside? Because in most of these cases, not all, of course, you can't give a quiz and have all the answers but yes. The answer is, yeah, satellite had a great deal to do with it. Again, intended to get people interested in the topic. And the last one, Space Saves Lives, goes right to the heart and says, this is what we're in the business of doing. We're in the business of saving lives, and you could be too. So our plan, which we'll I think probably be able to get out in January this year, is to put this together with some teacher's guide material to help people, to provide background as well for the teachers, as well as to suggest ways in which they can use this content. And we're going to publish it out for our members to take into classrooms, in their own communities, but also online to a lot of these science teacher websites that are so rich in material. We'll add our bit to it and see where it takes us. So that's the answer to that question. There's some questions in the message panel, I've been told, and unfortunately, all I got to do is figure out where the heck that is. You make it sound so easy. There's a gentleman in the background who's covering all kinds of things.
Robert, it's at the bottom. You'll see the Q&A window.
Good. Now, if I can just get my mouse to work. There we go, finally. Okay. In the Q&A window, well, how clever. Okay, other questions coming from our audience. Being such a fundamental part of our infrastructure, what are some of the top risks associated with satellites in terms of national security? For example, how vulnerable are they? And how do you work with governments to address this type of concern? Great, great question. I'm going to turn to Sharon, who's nodding her head. I know she has an answer for that, but I'll just tell you a story to start that out. The history of certainly national security satellites has tended to be about building extremely large, extremely capable platforms and putting them up high in the sky. And there was a famous one that went by the acronym TSAT. And back in the, I guess it was the first decade of this century, Congress did something it had never done before that I'm aware of, which is the program was so over budget and so over schedule that they canceled it. So, a lot of money down the drain, but at least to stop the bleeding. And this was a tremendous shock to the national security environment. And I remember going to a conference immediately after that, just before that conference, the Secretary of Defense said, all right, that's it, folks. We're not doing any more of these Battlestar Galactica projects in space. And I went to the conference, and every single uniformed active duty officer who got up and gave a speech used those exact words. And I thought, boy, there's the chain of command at work. So there's been a huge change in national security space. And do you want to jump into that, Sharon?
Oh, well, sure, but there's some things I just can't talk about.
Well, that is the problem, isn't it?
But yeah, it's an interesting kind of, it's a vertical market really for us in terms of, the services and technology support that we provide to the Department of Defense. And a lot of what we do in that line of our business is the kind of public-private partnership that brings innovation from the commercial sector and applies it to the government sector. So on that piece of our business is very much focused on enabling communications for the warfighter, really anytime, anywhere, any comms, we like to say. So anytime they need it, anywhere they need it, and using any kind of communication, whether it's satellite or fiber or wireless or whatever it may be. And wrapped into all of that and all of our development and technology and service offerings is a layer of security, which is just an ongoing aspect of our business. Anybody in the communications or technology field in this world today really needs to have security, top of mind, front and foremost constantly, in terms of being proactive in protecting against threats and having awareness of, what's going on across the cybersecurity industry, so that we can bring that into everything that we do.
Thank you. Haley, do you have anything you want to add to that? Or are you good?
No, I would just say the topic of cybersecurity, because I know we've kind of segued into that too, which is really an important topic. And I saw a question about that. So really, it is obviously a challenge and something that's very at the forefront right now in terms of the business industry. We've seen a lot of hacks. And I think the question particularly was asking about how do we go about navigating that? What are the challenges? How can we ensure that the infrastructure is staying safe? And that is something that we see a lot in our business and talking with our customers. And I really think it comes back to an education piece, as we've been talking about on today's webinar, as there, so many risks, but also so many different ways that there are vulnerabilities and many different ways that hackers can get in. So one thing that we really try to do is just have a lot of consultation time with customers and prospects, and really just share that educational piece of why protection is so important.
I wanted just to fill in some of the background on that. I mean, traditionally, satellites have been extremely sophisticated, kind of dumb devices in that their only job is to receive a radio signal from Earth and beam back an exact duplicate of that signal, right? So they were designed deliberately to be extremely simple, no processing taking place, just literally sending it back down again. Very hard to do, by the way, but nonetheless, that was the concept. And in that world, really all the cyber risk is on the ground. I mean, yes, it is possible to, since the days of Captain Midnight, anybody who can remember that back in the 70s when a guy took over HBO for a little while online, you can always, fire a lot of energy at a satellite and do something. But in terms of hacking it, of changing it, of getting into the data, into the network and doing something, you really couldn't unless you were going, just any internet connected device down on the ground that was part of the satellite network, you could potentially get into. There is actually increasing interest and concern in this issue now because the satellites that are being developed are going to have more and more processing power on them. And so that's the point at which you have to start worrying about the problem. And people are very, very actively working on it to the extent of there's now a movement to put quantum computer processing on a spacecraft, principally because it'll provide tremendous security. So it's something everybody's working on, as both Haley and Sharon said. Another question, and it was a good question, by the way, about just has the satellite industry benefited from the current infrastructure legislation? Well, when it's signed, we'll know. Is the government paying attention? Well, that's a very good question. There's multiple answers to that. One is absolutely not, because the government just decided to, well, with the acceptance of satellite operators just agreed to take a whole bunch of spectrum, as it's called, radio frequency spectrum, away from the satellite industry and give it to mobile. Okay. Maybe that was ultimately a good thing. I don't know. But in other ways, very much so. So in the current round of decision making and so forth, you've got Starlink, and you've got OneWeb at the table in terms of broadband deployment. So that's a big change. And Hughes has been in that business for, well, actually, forever. As long as it's existed, you've been in that business, and I'm sure that you're benefiting. So why don't I turn it over to you?
Well, sure. The focus on broadband connectivity. I mean, it's everybody needs to be connected, and that's what we're in the business of doing. Whether we're actually delivering the satellite internet service, which we do to over 1.5 million subscribers across the Americas, or we're providing the technology that enables other operators to provide that kind of connectivity all around the world. And unfortunately, and this is a big part of my job, satellite internet has a bit of a PR problem. And a lot of our work with regulators, and we have, a team who are, very focused on regulatory issues and working with the FCC and the ITU and other regulators, regulatory bodies around the world and within the states in the US. We need to make sure that satellite is included as part of the solution. And you mentioned Starlink and OneWeb, and what they're doing is really exciting. Hughes is actually an investor in OneWeb and a technology partner with OneWeb. It's wonderful to see these new entrants, these innovations, these new technologies coming into the mix. And it's very exciting as we see the coverage of the billionaires and what their companies are doing. But we have to keep in mind that the pace of demand is so large that it is going to exceed the capacity that a combination of all of these different operators could provide. And we really need every type of technology, whether it's the low Earth orbit services from a Starlink and a OneWeb, the geo services from a Hughes and other companies. Fiber on the ground makes a lot of sense in many places, and wireless has its place as well in that whole mix. And it's going to take all of those different kinds of technology to really ultimately bridge the digital divide for everyone.
Sure will. Another question here about, sort of the relationship between the commercial sector and government and SSPI. SSPI does not lobby. We're not lobbyists. We're actually, our bylaws don't let us do that. But government and satellite, yeah, it goes back to like 1960. Government's always been an important part of this industry. Haley, you want to Speedcast has a whole government division. You want to talk a little bit about that?
We do. And, it's a tough question for me, just given that on my side of the business, we're very focused on the commercial side of things, but we do have Ultisat, which is our government branch. So I am afraid to say I'm not the best person to ask, but I can definitely find some more information to help.
No problem. That's actually, that's deliberate. There's actually it's a separate company because that's the way the government deals. So let me turn back to Sharon. Sharon, actually, do you have a separate government subsidiary? Because most companies do.
It's not a separate subsidiary, but you have a government.
You do a lot of business with the government.
We have two verticals, one that focuses on Department of Defense types of solutions, and then another piece of our business which is within our enterprise segment that supports civilian government, federal and state. And then internationally, we work with governments to fulfill many universal service obligation programs all around the world. In fact, we have a program with Speedcast, a couple of different programs with Speedcast, one in Central America and one in I'm going to say Asia, offering cellular backhaul and community Wi-Fi services. So
that's one of the most exciting things to me going on in the business, in addition to the direct to home stuff coming out in the low Earth orbit, is this community Wi-Fi idea. Put very simply, we've had the ability to deliver internet over satellite for 20 years. but this is just a, it's a clever piece of technology / business model where you put a satellite terminal into a village or any other gathering place, a school or whatever, and then you use Wi-Fi connectivity to get it outbound. And what's exciting about it is you take this relatively expensive service, satellite's not going to be cheap because we're talking to something 30,000 kilometers in the sky, and you break it down to the point where it becomes affordable in a lot of developing nations. And it has really taken off tremendously in the last few years.
It has. It's been a great solution for us to be able to offer, again, to help support universal service obligations of some of these programs we redeploy with government subsidies in various locations. And then also enabling merchants in these unconnected villages to become entrepreneurs and sell their own local Wi-Fi service and do a service for their community and also enhance their businesses.
Yeah. So a question came in on the WOVA app, which I love, is the Kessler syndrome an imminent threat? Now, for those of you who aren't up on your Kessler syndrome, the idea has to do with the debris in space. Ever since we began launching things in space, we've been leaving garbage there, and it's circling the Earth at extremely high speed. And the Kessler syndrome posits that if you get enough of this stuff and it starts colliding and breaking up into more pieces, you're going to basically produce a chain reaction that's going to deny us access to space, because you have to launch through this fast moving cloud of terribly dangerous stuff in order to get to the rest of space. And the answer is, yeah. The good news is, yes, it is serious. If you've seen the film Gravity, you know what I'm talking about. And the encouraging thing is, after talking about this problem for 15 years at least, the industry and governments are beginning to actually get together and do something about it. So you're having very high level discussions among nations. You're beginning to have companies, the one I know best is Astroscale, actually developing technologies on a commercial basis because they think they're going to get paid for it, to begin reducing the amount or rather than being cleaning up what's there. And then the other part of it is put rules in place to keep more of it from being produced. Now, this is tough stuff. This is the tragedy of the commons, right? There's already a bunch of treaties that govern this, but they're not enforced. So it always comes down to the political will that the spacefaring nations can bring to this. I'm reasonably confident that we're going to do a good job of this. And if not, some big nasty disaster will then light us up and we'll do something about it. Sharon, do you have a view?
Well, from Hugh's perspective, there absolutely need to be rules in place to ensure space sustainability. And we as an operator care about space sustainability. And we believe that, all the operators need to operate their fleet safely and with consideration for others in the same orbit. I mean, we're passing through, the orbit. And it's a really interesting topic. It's an interesting moment in time in the industry as we work to make those rules at the regulatory and the national levels.
A question about the gap between demand versus supply in terms of space infrastructure. And the short form on that is that even though we're now putting up terabytes of capacity into the sky, the growth in internet demand knows no limit. Haley, I know Speedcast does a fair amount of this in its niches of serving maritime, of serving these particular things, but I know you're seeing huge growth in demand just from your existing customer set.
Absolutely. And the first industry that comes to mind is cruise, just because you have, as we move back into full cruise line capacity, now that we've gotten some of the COVID restrictions in place, and we're seeing much more of a demand on that front, which we were seeing before COVID. When you think about the hundreds, if not thousands of passengers on some of these cruise ships and the huge demand that has just skyrocketed over the past few years. So you think about that, I know it keeps our capacity teams busy, because not only do we have these, massive cruise ships with all this demand for bandwidth, but we have very important oil and gas operations going on, or commercial shipping efforts, mining camps that continue to conduct their work. So there's definitely a very, I would say, an exact science, I'm sure, that our brilliant minds in the space capacity team have to put into play here. So definitely a challenge, but it's something that, you know, that's what we have teams for, to ensure that that balance is achieved.
Well, the good news on this is that, you know, it's not just, you're not just dealing with the fixed technology. We tend, and again, in our industry, we tend to talk a lot about what goes on in space, but actually when it comes to delivering service, most of the smarts are on the ground. And your company has been very innovative in this. Hughes has pioneered a number of technologies and keeps doing it to grow, you know, just to get more and more and more and more and more high quality capacity through, or high quality data through the capacity that's available, right? Sharon, what, I mean,
Absolutely.
go ahead, sir, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to add too that that really goes into the thought of, you know, evaluating technologies, developing new technologies, and evaluating, depending on the customer set, is LEO an option? Is GEO the best option? So there's so many different things that come into play, and I'm sure Sharon has some thoughts on this as well.
Well, I would just say, you know, as far as the, you know, kind of the gap between supply and demand, I can just give one example that in the US alone, Hughes estimates that there are 17 million households that are unserved or underserved by other providers. And when we say underserved in the US, we mean at speeds less than broadband as defined by the FCC, which is 25 megabits per second down, 3 megabits per second up. So we estimate 17 million households unserved or underserved in the US right now. And over North America, over the next 4 years, we estimate that there's going to be a shortfall of many terabits of capacity to meet that demand.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
you know, it's exciting to see all of these different technologies come together and bring different solutions. And, but I'll say it again, we need to all be working together to bring the connectivity that people and businesses and things also need and will need for the foreseeable future.
Well, and I think that's a good note to kind of bring us to a close on this. This is an intensely collaborative industry. I have a joke when I tell people, I meet people who are just getting their first jobs in here or transitioning into this industry from another one. And I'll say, you know, I got to warn you about something. You can come into this industry, but you're never leaving, because it's fun. There's a huge spirit of collaboration and partnership, so that even, you know, deadly competitors get together. I'll give you an example. One of the major satellite companies 15 years ago lost control of their satellite. All of a sudden they couldn't control it anymore, but it was still operating. And it began drifting across the sky, you know, blasting away, right? And so, you know, it's the nightmare scenario. It's the thing that you would never, ever want to have happen. Well, they collaborated with all the other satellite operators to move spacecraft a little bit out this way or that way. We got through a whole year before they were finally able to seize control of the thing again, and not one service went down anyplace. And there's, you know, to this day, that company's very embarrassed about it, but I keep telling them, you are heroes. You are heroes, because the nightmare's out there for all of us, but you worked with this entire industry to make it happen. So that's not unusual. And it also extends to government. It extends to the nonprofit sector. The Environmental Defense Fund is building a satellite called MethaneSat. Right, and they're a nonprofit, and they're doing it so that we can measure the amount of methane emitted on the Earth. And they're doing it with the private sector. They're probably, I wouldn't be surprised if some government money is in there. That's the industry, and that's why we're so eager to get people to come and join us in this business. So I want to thank you very much. I want to thank Sharon Nirenberg and Haley for joining us on this panel. And again, if you want to see any more of these videos and learn any more about our business, you can go to www.bettersatellite.org. No, that's not right. Bettersatelliteworld.com. You think I'd know that. So it's www.bettersatelliteworld.com, and I'll take you right there. So for SSPI and for our thousands of members around the world, I want to thank you and look forward to our next opportunity to chat.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Haley. This was a great panel. I think that the audience enjoyed it very much. I learned myself a lot. So thank you. This was great.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.